Good evening, snufflers, and welcome to tonight's Truth Foragers here on the Boys in the Baltic Star channel. As always, the two of us would like to extend our gratitude to the Boys in the Baltic Star for allowing us to have our humble podcast live on their channel. Um, there's been a number of channels we've been banned from now. Rick, would you say? I think we're running out of options these days.
It's not quite all of them, but certainly a number. Yes. Um, for some reason, people find our willingness to speak the truth unnerving.
Oh, they do say about the stress of speaking truth to power quite often.
Yes, that's supposed to be the job of journalists, but journalists seem to be falling down in certain areas that we have to fill in.
I think it's been proven many times before when, in our younger years, when we used to trust journalists a bit more, that there were still some good ones. Um, we would more than one occasion we would work on something and take our findings to a journalist we thought we trusted, and they'd either not post anything or make a laughing stock of us.
Uh, yes, it would happen. I can remember being accused of all sorts of almost mental illnesses by a journalist simply because of the dossiers I presented to her. Um, now, at the time, I did to a certain extent blame myself because I think delivering the entire van load in one go might have been might have been more than she was expecting. But truthfully, there was a lifetime of journalism right there waiting for her to just open a page and jump in. And she rejected it pretty much out of hand. I was very disappointed.
Of course, it is true that in the end it turned out that what you had bought was wrong. But I don't blame
Well,
you. Of course,
yes,
it was the
of
untrustworthy leads.
I mean, if you want to split hairs, then yes, obviously. As it turns out, on that occasion, it was not the actual outcome we would normally hope for. But that is one of the perils of dealing with the ragged edge of information. Sometimes you get led down a path that seems conclusive, and then I don't know. It's like too many things aligned together, and you think this is definitely on, and you kind of get sucked into that belief system. I wonder if there's a name for that.
Well, as you yourself says, if there's too much proof, you start to not trust it.
It is a lesson learnt through bitter experience. The more people believe in something, the less likely it seems to be true. It is something of a worry, but it's also just the world in which we live. I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Speaking of the world that we're in, um, it is the night before the night of Christmas Eve, and we're here as the Truth Foragers uh, to bring you some urban legends, urban myths that we've been looking into for the last few months. It's not our first Christmas special; might be the first that you've seen because it's our first on Twitch and as this podcast. But it's something we've enjoyed doing for the last 20-25 years together, the festive
Yeah,
findings.
absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
must admit, Rick, the ones we've been researching this year, I'm very excited about. How about you?
I'm actually looking forward to telling these tales because I think some of them are gripping and weird and just genuinely fascinating. And they're not all by any means conclusively proven. I think that goes without saying. We are, as always, tentative in our assessments, but I think there's interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And dear viewers, thank you for joining us for that. Our wonderful snufflers who join us in our quest for those truth truffles. Uh, you're wonderful, wonderful. audience as always, and our podcast is always very interactive. We want to open the floor to you as well, dear listeners, dear viewers. I have to get used to it, Rick, with the video. I'm so used to them just hearing our dulcet tones. So if I call
It,
them listeners sometimes, it's force of habit, I suppose.
yes, it is. It is unfamiliar to us yet. We've only done a few this way, but you know those who've followed us for years through the podcasts and the radio broadcasts from
Mm.
that tiny little caravan outside
Oh,
Maidstone. You know those who know us will understand that we do embrace new technology. We were, like many in the community, resistant to transistor radios, preferring the valve-based systems for many years,
understandably so.
because you know they were um, so likely to pick up death messages from aliens and that kind of thing. But as technology improved, we were able to adapt to newer technologies. We're always looking for new things.
I'm so it took me a long time, if you remember, um, when we had our podcast to start with. It took me a very long time to stop calling the listeners faxers from our years of broadcasting through fax machines. We're sending faxes out and waiting for responses back. So it was a hard habit to break for me.
Yes, yes, and you know we've had to become selective about who we invite onto our podcasts, because sometimes you get some very weird people.
Oh, very much so. I think it's been a while since we've had weird people. We've been very fortunate as our circle has crystallized, I'd say, into some very trustworthy callers. We're not joined by any this evening, though, Rick. It's very much a Christmas special with just the two of us.
As it often has been in the past.
I think it's a special show that we like to wrap a figurative arm around each other, um, pull a cracker or two to see what mythical treats we can find inside.
Mm.
Um, so, dear viewers, dear listeners, um, if you, as we go through um, our four special myths this evening, if you have any extra information from your own snuffling, please feel free to interject at any time. If you've got any extra questions about them, please also feel free to put them to us. We'd like to be very interactive in that way. At the end of each, we will ask each other whether we believe or we remain skeptical with these myths. There are options there as well for you to spend some imperial credits, I believe they're called on this channel. On
They are, yes. This is an offshoot of the fact that this is originally a science fiction gaming, channel. So we're very thankful to the boys from the Baltic Star for letting us use their internet-based airwaves.
exactly, well, we're very much happy to be here and happy that they could have us. So click on some points, spend them. I think most of them will interact. There might be some things we'll find confusing, but we will do our best along the way. Ah, the price is right. Wonderful. That is what
We'll
it
try.
was. Uh, so, funny before we start, I'd like to introduce the two of us before we go into our first myth for this evening. My name is Dickie Waghorn. Um, I can't tell you exactly where I am. It is somewhere in Kent, and I'm humbled to be able to present this with a long-term friend. We grew up together. Um, he is, of course, 32 years older than me. He's aging incredibly well. He taught me everything I know. Uh, he treated me almost like a nephew, and then a brother, and now a cousin. For a short time, he treated me like his wife, which was confusing. But then we came back to cousin again.
I think we were
And
both confused by that, to
it
be
was
honest.
it was they were very confusing times indeed those years. But we're back to how I feel it feels best as cousins, not too close, but respectful and friendly with each other. It's the highly learned Rick Bishop. Good evening, Rick, and how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, very well, and I will follow your lead and not reveal exactly where I am. I I suppose I could give them a hint and reveal exactly how far away I am from your undisclosed location, but I won't.
It's for the best. We don't want to give them
I
any
think it's for the
options.
best. Yes.
Um, as always, all of you that have signed in for the evening, I trust that you have completed your packs that we send to you. We, of course, the second we get your IP addresses, we can trace your addresses, a lot about you, so we send packs in. It's for your own safety, of course, dear viewer. Hope you've completed the urine tests, the full family background, the IQ tests, and listed all the books you've read in the last year. Um,
Yeah, and remember to write down a full description for each of the ink blots. And just to Carl out there, number three is not what you said it is. That's just definitely not right.
although, from a certain angle, she can look like that.
Well, we've talked about that in the past, but yes, it's just not the right answer, and we don't need that in our mail. Thank you.
Well, no, you like to leave your mail open for actresses of an earlier vintage.
Much earlier.
uh, so, if you'll excuse me, I have to go to the graphics machine and start typing some things in to make the changes. So our pictures may go a bit wonky for a little while. I'm not used to this sort of thing, Rick. All this video shenanigans. So hopefully people accept my shortcomings.
Well, if we weren't willing to accept yours, who would accept ours?
It is very true. It's very true. So this evening's first myth is one uh, that's been known around the Western world, especially as the Christmas feast. It's I'm surprised we haven't done this one before, Rick. It's quite well known as far as some of the myths we cover are.
I mean, it is well known, but I think realistically, we both knew we were going to save this one for the Christmas episode, weren't we?
Of
Um,
course.
I mean, I know technically we didn't have to, but I feel it was kind of inevitable that that was going to be how it would go. Um, yes, as you say, it is well known, and it does appear to be um, much more universal than just the Christian tradition. But obviously, in this part of the world, we do tend to call it the Christmas feast. Um, yeah, so I mean, I can't remember. Did I actually introduce you to this one? Because it's been around for a while, hasn't it?
You did. It was there was a brief period I remember. It was a long time ago in the I think it was about 2003. Um, we had this whole burst of excitement towards food related legends.
Mm.
I don't know what it was. I think we were both on a diet at the time to shed some extra weight, and I think a bit of hunger led us down these rabbit holes.
I remember I was going through that phase where I wouldn't eat anything that was had any primary colours in it because I thought they interfered, they interacted with radio signals.
It was, and that's still not been disproven. It must be said.
I'm still not comfortable. Every time I eat a tomato, it just feels wrong to me.
It might be your allergy to tomatoes, but
Well, yes, it could be that, of course. I mean, obviously, but I'm not sure that necessarily applies in every case.
no, I think that's very very reasonable. After all, I remember you saying the more purpley tomatoes don't leave you with that feeling. So, oh, yeah.
Yes, though, when I later looked into that in more detail, it turned out they were plums.
Of course, that makes a lot of sense actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Christmas feast, so I remember during that 2003, I spent a lot of time looking at. I'd just come out of looking at myths around religious festivals in
Hmm.
general, and you've been looking a lot at. And as we moved into food, you pulled this up to me, and I immediately was wow. This feels like fate has aligned, and this must be something to look more deeply into. And we did for a while, and then other things happened, and other things came up, and that's what's lovely to return to it earlier this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those ones that's relatively hard to investigate because it's a story that people they don't exactly forget about, but it's no longer at the forefront of their mind until Christmas comes around again,
Of
and then they
course.
start to tell the story to each other, and it sort of has a little resurgence. Um, so I don't know if you actually found an earlier occasion for this, but the first time that I hear of it is in a northern town in England called Whitby, um, which is an old historic sort of port town and a fishing town and a place that has traditions of the sea. Um, but my sort of assumption that there was something unique about that location was quickly dashed because the stories seem to crop up in towns and cities all over the UK. And then, as soon as we started looking, of course, there were examples of essentially the same thing in France, in Germany, in Italy, even. Um,
That surprised me somewhat. Italy, I'd
Me
say.
too. Yeah, it didn't feel Italian, did it, when you
No.
first heard about it? Um, there was so little pasta involved.
Almost none, in fact.
Exactly. So this one, I mean, just in case, I'm sure everyone has come across it before, but just in case, the story is that you have a domestic setting. It varies from telling to telling, but there's a domestic setting, and on Christmas morning, the family sets out to go to church,
Mm.
or in some cases, they're not Christians. It's another religious festival, but at the same kind of time of year, the sort of winter solstice kind of time. They go out to their celebrations to sing a song and light a candle and do whatever their particular tradition happens to be. And when they get home, they're ready to prepare their Christmas lunch. But when they get home, it's waiting for them. It's already been prepared. And it's just sitting on the table. Now, in all of the versions that we've seen, because there are a lot of stories about walking in and finding something prepared for you, and in most cases, we strongly recommend not eating the food in that situation. But in this particular case, it always seems to be that the actual food they had ready is the food that's prepared. It's their meat on the table, it's their vegetables that have been prepared. And though the exact details vary, everyone seems very confident that the quality is outstanding. In some cases, it's just considered the best they've ever had. In other cases, it's like their grandmother used to do before she died, kind of thing. It's like it's somehow done to an old family recipe. Um, and the more we looked, the more we found stories of exactly this happening, didn't we?
It was fascinating. Like always, it's when you catch a bit of thread on a jumper or something, and you give it a little tug, and suddenly it just all unravels. There's more and more the more you pull at it, and the more we pulled at this thread, we just saw so many examples of it. I think you're saying of how it was, how often it'd be cooked as if a, a, a recently deceased grandmother had prepared, or flavors harking back to their childhood, something like that. Definitely rings true. That seemed to be more often the case. Some of the richer people in the stories would often uh, talk of a former servant, maybe a preferred cook that had made it so deliciously, and it's always been, for those that have sat down and eaten it at that time, a truly scrumptious feast. That moment of confusion uh, passes in the moment, especially when children get excited. And for those that sit and eat, it's the best Christmas feast that they can remember.
Absolutely. And here, I suppose, is where the story diverges from similar kinds of things, because a lot of people have ascribed the actual creation of the feast. They've declared it has to be the spirit of a forgotten friend, a departed relative, someone coming in. Um, and as the meal comes to an end, there is perhaps an underlying truth to why the food is ready for them when they get home. Because the number of times people report an unexpected visitor turning up at the end of the meal who would be interrupting their meal if they'd had to prepare it themselves, but in fact turns up just as they are finishing and ready to receive a guest. That seems to be a common thread as well. Um, as is as Kelly has pointed out, there are a lot of occasions where, unaccountably, when you get large numbers of the family together around a table to eat a meal like this, and you'd think everything would be sweetness and light in such a situation, those who sit down to this feast do, on occasions, turn out to have arguments, often about things that seem trivial or should be long put in the past. It's shocking. It really is. The extent to which that happens, which obviously would never happen if you were preparing food yourselves.
Maybe it's the loss of the, as stressful, of course, as Christmas dinners no doubt are. Mine are microwaved every year, of course, from
Mm.
from from ready meals.
Mm.
Um, Especially trusted ones, of course. I can always send out the brands after the show if anyone wants. But maybe it's the togetherness that comes from producing such a feast is lost. With that, some disharmony can come from that.
Hmm.
Those that are used to putting the little crosses at the bottom of a sprout or peeling a parsnip perhaps don't feel the investment in the meal, however delicious it is.
There is something, I think, in the psychological human condition about, if something is given to you, it has a different sensibility than if it's earned somehow. Yes, I think that is basically true. Um, and maybe this is where the nature of the fact that you have to hurry through it because it's obviously getting cold when you arrive home. Maybe that has something to do with it as well. It's just that it does seem to dredge up old family arguments, um, and that seems very strange.
Now, of course, the importance of that pressure of eating it immediately. A lot of families do immediately after that moment of shock and surprise. Assume that someone else has prepared it, whoever they're not quite sure, Christmas miracle perhaps, and sit down to eat. The disharmony can begin from that unexpected urgency and the lack of the sacrifice of time, as Kelly puts it very eloquently.
Hmm.
Um, but I looked more into the some of the tales of those that didn't eat it immediately, and
Interesting.
what I found was rather shocking in ways that those that maybe left it for an hour, through not certainty, or went out again to try and hunt out who had done such a deed, came back and instead of a sumptuous meal, um, the the meat was just the carcasses. The vegetables were rotten.
Mm.
There was decay, almost as if there was a faster breakdown of such things, and rather than being a scrumptious feast, was quite terrifying in a way, Rick.
It's a common thread in these kind of food related things that the number of occasions where people talk about, reaching out to the shiniest and most delicious apple they've ever seen, but then as soon as you try to take a bite, it turns out it's rotten to the core. These are these are common threads in quite a lot of these inexplicable food related things. And I mean, you've probably done as much work as I have on these food legends, and in many cases they've been ascribed to ghosts or evil spirits. In some cases, to pacts with demons that came to fruition a certain way. But I think what we tend to find is that there are a limited number of underlying causes for things, and you generally have to look deeper than something as trivial as a great grandfather who made a pact with a sorcerer to connect him to a demon in order to gain advantage when pursuing the suit of the love of his life, who then, tragically died in a carriage accident, and there was a problem at the funeral because another one of her suitors turned up and engaged the man in a duel. I mean, these utterly simplistic surface level explanations often don't delve deep enough, I find.
I think so. I think often there is a lot to it. Kelly's making excellent points this evening. The appropriate
Mm.
appreciation of effort that maybe decay sets in so fast because of that lack of appreciation of effort, and it seems tied in as well to that the visitor, Rick, that perhaps, like you say, the visitor being able to be welcomed
Mm.
because the meal had been ready, but by delaying the eating of it, it's as if the meal has taken matters into its own hands to ensure that they are not eating when this visitor calls.
It is again a very human reaction. I think if you were to put in a great deal of effort for something and people then showed no appreciation for it,
Mm.
um, and looked at it as if it was unwanted or undesirable in some way, you would probably feel quite slighted. And that kind of feeling, which you often get with this story, does imply to me that it's a human agent of some kind involved, not um, some creature or entity with a completely different value set. It does feel like a human and sometimes even petty story, doesn't it?
Hmm. I think so. And what are humans if we are not petty?
Absolutely. Yeah, my only concern in this matter is that, as far as we can track down, the visitors appear to be essentially random and unconnected to the specific event. The tales are not universally attached with any particular religion or tradition or location. And I mean, I think we've encountered, both of us, occasions where people try to squeeze into this legend things that probably don't strictly fit.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I think we both recall the Duke of Malmesbury's tale that we spent quite a lot of time investigating.
Oh, too
And
much time, I'd say.
as it turned out, much more time than was warranted. Because he told exactly this tale of heading out with his family to to church and then returning to find that Christmas lunch was literally being available on the table as they returned. But it wasn't until several minutes into the interview that he revealed he had a full domestic staff who had been
Mm.
tasked with preparing the food while they were out,
Mm.
um, which did rather suggest that the explanation in this case was less mysterious than he'd led us to believe.
And there are some that definitely embellish as well. There was a whole spate of tales of this from America in the late 70s,
Mm,
especially, where the visitor would be Elvis. It's such a cheap, such a,
mm.
a classic uh, urban legend that is almost laughable now, looking back at it.
Exactly, and I mean, was it last year or the year before we were chatting with somebody who asserted that they had definitely had this experience, because they, at the end of their Christmas lunch, opened up a chocolate orange to find that the individual chocolate segments had already been separated and didn't need to be banged firmly on the table in order to jog them loose. Which, sure, I mean, it's unusual, but I'm not sure that really qualifies as the complete preparation of a Christmas feast. Not to me, anyway.
It's very, very, very true. Um, there's that run of the wives being shocked at coming downstairs to a Christmas breakfast and a mimosa. But it was just the husband who doesn't cook for the rest of the year, finally deciding one day a year to prepare something.
Which does probably rise to the standards of the supernatural, but not necessarily the mysterious. It's not inexplicable, it's just clearly very bizarre behavior.
Absolutely. So, I guess to draw it to an end before we make our final decisions, you looked more into this final aspect than me. Um, could you find any possible connection in who may have cooked and prepared the meal? Were there any patterns at all in your research?
The the nature of it, it's a problem I've encountered so many times with these widely known and shared stories. Of course, I found patterns, decisive, obvious, distinctive patterns, which pointed very clearly to exactly who would be responsible. Unfortunately, depending on which of the myths you looked at, they pointed to different entities, completely, decisively, and obviously. In fact, the more you looked, the more obvious it became that it was another one, and then another one, and then another one. So I can rule out some of them fairly quickly. I think the underlying theme that some people came across about uh, Babylonian cannibal deities are pretty clearly not the case, because the feast would even be prepared for vegetarians on occasion. So I think we can rule out those. But other than that, I'm afraid the problem we have is an embarrassment of riches when it comes to choosing an actual candidate, much as these lucky diners found an embarrassment of riches on their table.
Oh, what a perfect way to end it, Rick. I couldn't have said it better myself. So, with the spooky music stopping, um, I come to you and ask the most important question of the segment. And as always, dear viewers, you may join in too with your answers. Rick Bishop. Let me put some important music in. Do you believe or do you remain skeptical?
It's a tough one, but on balance, I don't have enough to believe. I remain a little skeptical.
As is always the case with you, when there's a lot of evidence around, it becomes harder for you to push to get it across the line, as it were.
It's too many cases, too widespread. I'm sorry. What can I say?
Mm. I think for me, it's difficult because I can give two different answers here. As far as an underpinning um, spiritual myth, I suppose, I would definitely remain skeptical for similar reasons to you. I think maybe sometimes it's been done to build the myth. Maybe people that are aware of it have taken it upon themselves in some regard. But with regards to it actually happening and instances, I truly believe. I think there's been so many cases that the Christmas feast exists. Just whether there is something more important behind it, I can't be too sure.
Hmm.
It seems that already half spliced in the chat is also a believer in it, and I totally get it. I'm sure he's heard of it, as many people have.
Um, and and it is a compelling story, and yes, especially if you've only heard it once from one person, but they're a very trustworthy person, of course, then
Of course.
it can be compellingly hard to walk away from it.
I think so. As always, you like to delve deeper, Rick, and that's what I appreciate about you more than anything, I'd say.
It is my way.
Yes. Well, moving on, we could carry on with our way, which is to take on a second myth for this evening. Uh, it's let me get back in the old graphics. Um, this is um, this is from the '60s, um, Rick, a time that is fond to many people's hearts,
Mm-hmm.
and came out of America. So I'm sure we can all picture 1960s America at the time. And what could be more 1960s America than this next myth, which is the myth of, if the graphical work, the mall Santa.
Ah, yes. Yeah. Now, obviously, my own examinations into the United States haven't gone as deeply as yours, um, because I enjoy that aspect of our work where you spend months hunting through dusty archives in ancient cities,
Mm.
and no, it's harder to find dusty archives in ancient cities in Utah, but
It's dusty.
but so perhaps you could introduce this one, because I think it's more your hitting zone, if you know what I mean.
Well, as you know, I enjoy taking summer trips. It's always been my. Are they? Oh no! Can you hear us, Russ? Um, all the colours look good from my end. Oh no, the video seems to be working. Kelly, could you let us know if it's working okay at your end? Everything is letting me click around. Everything, as much as neither of us are as good at technology as the boys in the Baltic Star, of course. Um, hopefully, is it working on your carefully maintained connection, Rick?
It does appear to be, yes.
Well, we'll continue for now. Um, I'm moving my head around to check that it is on
Mm.
the video, so I'll assume it's fine for now. There was some flickering of images. Yeah, the flickering of videos changes when the graphics are being changed. Um, Roll 20, which we were shown how to use from the Boys and the Baltic Star. It's very useful, but it does flicker a little bit if you jump between programs. Um, but yes, the more sound. So as you know, Rick, I enjoy spending my summer months on different trips, my fact finding missions. As I
Hmm.
spent mine this summer, of course, as we met our new friend who's podcasted with us since. Um, and there was a run of 3 or 4 years where each of my summers I did go to America.
Hmm.
There's a whole wealth of wonderful myths and legends out there. Who can forget the gas attendant, Rick, that we looked into a few months ago?
Absolutely. Yes, as a story which, as far as we're aware, originated in the United States, and which I think still fills our inbox with nightmarish recollections from viewers. It is um, a terrifying tale, and one that we have covered on the video part of this of our time together. So that should be up there on the Boys in the Baltic Stars channel if you're curious to catch up.
I think it's the first video that we recorded here. I think they upload to their YouTube as well, which is very kind
Hmm.
of them. So if you want some 1960s Americana, 50s, 60s Americana, then that's worth checking out. But yes, so I spent a lot of time, as you would expect, in shopping malls, strip malls, uh, into town on gas stations, in diners, in
Mm.
Denny's, and so on and so forth. And there's something, there's a lot of strange energy in American shopping malls, Rick. Um, I'm sure you've at least read about that, even if you've not been there.
I have on occasions been to the United States, and I have been through what they refer to as a shopping mall. For those who are not American, just to bring you up to date, a mall is what the Americans use to refer to what we would call a shopping center, and the 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 word is the same as the English word mall, but repurposed.
As in Pall Mall in London, of course.
Indeed. Um, Probably the second most famous street in London with that word in it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like to go for the most obvious.
It would be a shock if either of us did, to be honest.
Oh. Um, in my summer journeys, of course, summer is not the time for mall Santas.
Mm,
Um, it's not a good time of year to be a mall Santa. Pay is quite low. Desire is also quite low. Um, but speaking to a few of the cleaners, cleaning out the bins there, as always go to the cleaners first. Always go to caretakers. They're the ones
mm,
that bring you. They are they hold the information. They get their fingers on rubbish and all thrown away notes and all sorts of things. People talk freely in the presence of caretakers and cleaners.
mm.
And speaking to one, they told me a story in that specific mall of a mall Santa, uh, a well-known tale of one back in the 60s. And as I researched more, I found similar tales in half a dozen other malls in the same area. Now, while it's not the most widespread tale, a pattern's definitely forming, Rick. And you are the man for patterns, and that's why I brought it to you originally.
Mm.
Did you find
Well,
much beyond at all?
obviously, the first thing we need to understand, of course, is that the common elements here are the perception that what you're dealing with is a Santa, a Father Christmas, if you will. And there's an assumption always made in these circumstances that, first of all, that's who it is. And secondly, that it is, in fact, a mall Santa distinct from an actual spirit of the Christmas festivities dispensing hypersonic gifts from a flying sled.
Hmm.
Which obviously, if it were that entity, the story might take a very different turn. Um, Broadly, this is, I mean, it's a common urban legend in the United States, and it falls, I mean, for me, very closely into their places where they have fears about their children in particular. Um, the So you get stories of horrors on Halloween, for example, where children are out together trick or treating. You get stories at shopping malls where children are naturally inclined to trust a Santa. And in a shopping mall in particular, it's an environment where they're quite likely to see one. Um, but it's important to note that not every case does it actually turn out to be a strictly a mall Santa, because the exact same sequence of events associated with it, for example, um, I found a case of in London. For
Hmm.
those who are not entirely au fait, what we're talking about here is a crime committed, usually in the form of a fairly uh, grand theft by a mall Santa who walks up and steals something that is important to somebody and then disappears. And despite their obvious garb and the way they're dressed, they are clearly acting far from in the best interests of the family or the person they steal from. Um, and so I was a little surprised because we don't really have that many mall Santas in the UK, and certainly not in August. Um, but but I did in fact have the exact same story played out for me of somebody being robbed on a street in London. And I was shocked when I first heard the tale. And they described what it was undeniably a mall Santa. You know, the white hair and the red robes. Um, it wasn't until I investigated a little more deeply that I realised it was actually a Crown Court judge who'd stolen from them. Um, and and so it is important to realise it's not necessarily a Santa in every case. In some of the American instances, it could be a mall Santa, or it could just be a person with a bit of a weight problem, dressed in red, who happens to have white hair and possibly a flowing beard, and maybe an unusually shaped hat and some elves.
Well, the elves, for those watching, is not always the case.
Not in every instance, by any means.
um, the I think the theft is the thing that the victims remember.
Mm.
Um, what and sometimes that is taken from them through barging into them, walking past. Sometimes they've willingly walked into a an empty shop that seems like it's been set up for a Santa's grotto and handed over money willingly to someone they think is Santa,
Mm.
almost like a theft in day, in open daylight. But
Right.
the strangest thing is that after said theft, um, there is never any record from security, or more chillingly, perhaps even on video cameras of such an individual, whether barging into them in the street or taking from them in a mall. There is, it's as if this person did not exist, and yet the money, the shopping, and so on that they suggested was taken was indeed taken, but no record of the thief on anything.
It is. I mean, it is suspicious because it's one of those things that we have learnt to our peril over the years. We have repeatedly investigating countless different stories, countless different accounts. The number of times somebody has said, "Oh," and then the entity, the apparition, the
Mm,
vampire, the monster, the werewolf, the whatever it happened to be, um, flew off down the high street right in front of that security camera.
mm.
And when you look back at the security footage, it turns out there is no such entity visible. Which means, as we all know, security cameras simply aren't reliable.
No.
They cannot capture the experience of the person on the street, not consistently, it turns out.
And you've sent a lot of emails to a lot of shops telling them that they need to upgrade their cameras for such things.
I have, and often with attested accounts of um, entities of the night that clearly were described carrying out obvious acts directly in the line of sight of their cameras, and yet they were unable to produce the footage. Whenever this happens, I always produce a detailed analysis for them explaining that their security cameras are not up to the task, either because the technology is outdated or because they haven't been blessed by a sufficiently high level sorcerer or any number of other traditional and technical causes.
Now, a lot of these malls and places are, of course, running on a budget, Rick. So I do understand why they're not willing to
Hmm.
shell out so many thousands for one of your specially suggested cameras,
Hmm.
um, especially as accounts are relatively limited. Um, but maybe they should. Because there definitely seems that there could be something spiritual or um, of the other realm about this. Like
Mm.
it is a theft in daylight, and yet any when they've gone to these shops where the parents and the children have sworn blind that it's set up beautifully as a grotto.
Yeah.
Um, people have described these the judges in all their robes, like describe them to the wrinkle, and
Yes.
yet when footage is looked at, it has been an empty shop, and they've just seen the family walk into the shop, the empty shop, maybe pull the door open, and then 5 minutes later just leave. It's, it's, there's something to it, in my opinion.
There are cases, I think, which baffle me completely. The one you showed me that you analyzed in rural Ohio still resonates.
That's a good one. That was a very good one.
In a small town, a little strip mall just outside the center. This is not like the high end of the financial pyramid. It's a small mall run by, only with what, a dozen units or so inside it, and a family was robbed most efficiently by a mall Santa who essentially convinced them to get dressed into outfits for the purposes of having a photograph taken, and
Mm,
then while they were in the process of putting down their belongings and everything, absconded with all of their wallets and bags and things like that, which is obviously horrendous, and clearly they provided a very accurate description of the perpetrator, a a portly gentleman with long white hair and beard and dressed in red robes and everything that you'd expect from a mall Santa. Um, and much as it might be unusual to go through the process of having a photograph taken with a mall Santa in August, I felt that their argument that it was a very efficient way of actually beating the queues that can
mm,
develop for such services in December was compelling. And we went through the accounts in detail, including the testimony by the I say head of security, but in such a small mall, the only actual security guard on duty, who went through all the tapes for us and reported that there was literally no sign of anything on those tapes, despite the not only the sworn statements of the family, but also the police investigation and the determination they had to go to the press and tell their stories. Um, and I found that security guard extremely compelling and very, very convincing. But I mean, like most people, I'm often swayed by somebody who looks as distinguished as him. Heavy set man with
mm,
long white hair and a flowing beard. Always
mm.
gives you an air of confidence. But he was unable to identify any sign of a perpetrator, and I found that astonishing. Which does mean it has to be clearly something that is deeply supernatural.
It's it's strange that even though it first came out in the 60s, there are still tales coming now. Maybe not in its heyday, but we still hear of it. Maybe it is the because the mall Santa, the portly gentleman in red, is so tied into our societal sense at this time of year. At any time of year, anyone recognises Santa, and it's so limited to America, basically, with a couple of British. So I think, especially more recently, as the American flavour for such holidays has
Mm.
spread across, hasn't it? Much more so in that regard. Um, that is it. Mass hypnosis? Is it something spiritual? Is it confusion? Is it? Well, we've talked before about malls, what they pump through the air conditioning.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of options here, Rick.
I think I think we find ourselves in one of those situations where once we accept that stories are accurate, the nature of the events are true, the circumstances are simply too compelling and too widely coincidental. Um, and we know there's no such thing as coincidence, but there are things that are similar that happen close together.
Mm,
And there is a confluence of understanding here which could not be clearer. There's something happening, and it's relatively recent, as in, the last 50 years kind of recent, or last 60 years kind of recent. It didn't happen. There were no mass thefts of um, from shopping malls in the United States at all, back in the 1930s, 1940s, before shopping malls were widely built. They simply were not a common facet of American life, and they've emerged since then. It is as if you build a shopping mall, Santas will appear in it.
mm. Well, managers have often said that although they've looked at hiring Santas, these cases have happened a week or two before the expected Santa has actually been booked to arrive.
Yes, yes, exactly. Sometimes months, and occasionally years before
Hmm.
the shopping mall was even constructed. People see random sights of a Santa wandering around the area, and you think, I wonder what he's doing. Or, I mean, obviously, it could just be a person wearing red, but I think still it is clear that there is something very, very spooky going on here. The question is whether or not it is a single coherent tale, or if it's random elements that we, in our attempts to find
Mm.
explanations, are putting together that don't necessarily mesh.
In that, one of the things we can always look to for that coherence is the aftermath, I suppose. If there is a something that pulls it together at the end. Um, Another thing that you focused on more than I was very much looking into whether the lost items were ever recovered.
Mm.
Um, was there a pattern to that at all, or again was it such a mishmash that it's hard to put a single underlying picture behind it?
Um, it's fair to say that in some instances the items have been recovered. In most cases, though, and I find this deeply suspicious, once gone, they are never seen again.
Which and these people, and this is for me that draws me back in. The fact that you have a family that I know, especially in the 60s, 70s, and that there's very grainy footage into the 80s is probably the
Mm.
best you can get in that. Um, but sometimes you can see these families walking through with bags of new shopping,
Mm.
going into a shop and leaving without the bags or without obviously making signals as if they've lost something or wallet or such like.
Mm.
And when security's gone in, it's never been recovered. So that for me, that is something. The spirited into thin air is fascinating to me.
The other thing that I uncovered looking through these things, shopping malls in the United States often have commercials that they release advertising their mall, not just as a place to shop, but as a place to visit, a place of entertainment.
Hmm.
Some of them have cinemas, which for reasons that I don't really understand, they unaccountably called theatres. Some of them have what are called bowling alleys, which, for reasons that I find confusing, have 10 rather than 9 pins. I don't really follow,
Mm.
but but it turns out that they sell themselves not just as a place where you can find the shops, but also as a place to visit, to eat, to drink, to meet friends, to do things. And when they put out these commercials, they try to pitch the idea of the kinds of things you can do at these events. And to my astonishment, it is almost impossible to find a single one of these advertisements that does not include an image of a shopping mall Santa. It is remarkable, even if the advert is in September or March. Almost always, somewhere in this advert, there will be a
Mm.
mall Santa. It is twisted and weird and genuinely frightening, I feel.
And yet, when you push the publisher, they would swear blind that they have not put such a thing on the adverts.
Um, Mostly, I haven't had definitive responses from these people. I mean, declarative responses, absolutely. But they mostly consist of some Americanized variation of the phrase, go away. Um, Actually, getting an answer from them seems to be tougher, in my experience.
So, with all this uncertainty of mysterious thefts, vanishing Santas, items often not recovered, the random British finding, a whole range of portly, rosy cheeked gentlemen with long white hair and red suits.
Hmm.
Um, the case of the Mall Santa, Rick Bishop, are you, how do you feel on it? Do you believe or do you remain sceptical?
Well, the nature of the reports, often the complete absence of video footage, which I find particularly instructive,
Mm.
means that I have to say I believe.
I think I'm not surprised. I think when I showed you some of the footage last month, you were wavering then,
Hmm.
but the graininess of one of the videos seemed to draw you in immensely.
This is it. High definition video is much, much easier to fake. I'm so impressed by how poor quality that material was. It felt so authentic.
Mm. And I think for that reason too, I I also believe that there is whether it is a vicious spirit or a mass hallucination, something in. I'm a big fan of something in the air conditioning. It must be said. I
Hmm.
wouldn't put it past them in America in the malls. But there's more than meets the eye about the mall Santa, and just like you, Rick Bishop, I believe, and it's nice to agree with you.
Hmm. Yes, it does feel like this is one we're definitely on the same page.
Absolutely. And I think something else we're on the same page on is the need to take a 5 minute toilet and refilling the glass break, I believe.
Yes, yes. I noticed actually a small tear in the tinfoil ceilings I have above me, so I should probably patch that
Oh,
up before we
yeah,
continue as well.
you don't want to go on to the next one before that. You never know who's listening, and the next one could indeed catch a few unwanted ears, as it were.
Yes, I mean, believe it or not, the hole is apparently so severe that I actually received a text message earlier.
It's been 12 years since you've received a text message.
Well, yes, it's alarming when that happens.
Speaking of
Apparently, there's a bill due or something.
speaking of which, do you have my pigeon? I need it to return if, from the last message I sent you.
Yes, yes. I did like your plan um, to sell it around town to people who needed a homing pigeon. Um, and you managed to sell it what 23 times?
I did very well, I think.
Mm. Yes, I will return it, of course, when we next meet up.
Wonderful. But dear viewer, you don't need to know our plans about homing pigeons. Enjoy a 5 minute break on us, and please return afterwards for more. We hope two more fascinating urban myths and urban legends from Christmas time. But during the 5 minutes, snuffle carefully. Good evening and welcome back, dear friends. Welcome back to the second part of tonight's festive Truth Foragers. Let no one say that we aren't festive, despite those letters you received from local residents a few years ago, Rick. Who,
A team of Grinches, one might say.
exactly. I felt bad that they targeted you for that. I thought you did nothing wrong at all.
Um, I often feel I'm unfairly picked upon by those who feel that perhaps they have something to hide, and they're worried that I might end up, you know, revealing some dark secret about them. It's a perpetual concern that I have, and I'm sure you have as well.
Um, to use a biblical phrase, one must not hide their light under a bushel.
Hmm.
And we definitely do our best not to in the snuffling brigade, of
Hmm.
course. Uh,
Yes, indeed, it's very true.
Speaking of snuffling, well, we've snuffled two other special festive urban myths and urban legends. We've looked into it. We spent many hours pondering the two, poring over notes and footage and such like from uh, my favourite stories from people. Is my favourite. Rick is a man of books and dusty tomes.
Hmm.
I'm eyewitness reports and people. I think that's why we work so well together, Rick. We have every angle covered.
I think that's probably true. Our skill set and our interests, vary wildly, but we do seem to support each other's work most efficiently.
I think it also works because I'm willing to come to your place of lodging as you rarely leave these days.
Mm.
Thank you. You're a welcoming friend, and you always provide me with all I need. Tins of peaches, especially.
I do have tins of peaches quite extensively because uh, when I did eventually get over my aversion to primary colours, I found that things that were yellow did appeal.
It's true. You always do have millions of peaches for me, and those millions of peaches are always for free, and I appreciate you greatly for
You're very welcome, of course.
that. Right, moving on to the next tale is quite wide-reaching. It's insidious because it involves a major multi-billion-pound company. Whether it does or not is another thing, but it focuses on part of advertising, something that uh, we're both very suspicious and wary of. But this one, especially, Rick, is one that you wrote a very fascinating pamphlet on the tale of the Coca-Cola truck. How many people did you end up posting your pamphlet on this out to in the end?
Well, including those who had specifically requested it originally, before it was even written, it went out to a total of nine, which is the widest circulation of any of my pamphlets.
Geographically, quite distance.
Some were as far away as Tenterden.
That is quite a distance.
Mm.
Congratulations, Rick. I didn't realise it was quite so successful.
It has graced almost 10 bookshelves.
Mm.
Um, I assume still there, of course. I don't I don't know what happens to them after this end, obviously.
It doesn't
Um,
take up much space, at least. There's no reason to
it
throw it away for.
it turns out a slim pamphlet. Yes, yes, and an interesting story.
Please enlighten us on, I guess, on firstly, what made you look into this in particular?
It was the first thing was the number of people who reported an unexpected sighting of a Coca-Cola truck on their television screens.
Mhm.
This wasn't um, sort of in the background of news footage or anything. It tended to be during commercial breaks. But what was interesting about it was that it happened year after year after year after year. And in the run up to Christmas, it became almost impossible to get through a commercial break without a sighting of this particular phenomenon, um, a, a brightly lit American style lorry, articulated lorry, with the words Coca Cola emblazoned down the sides, usually accompanied by jaunty music. Um, the simple scale of the phenomenon was so large, I had to investigate deeply.
Right. As you were writing the pamphlet, you sent me some footage of it,
Hmm.
which really it sent the hairs on the back of my neck definitely stood up to see the Coca-Cola truck. Well, it's that thing. Once you know what to look for, you notice it. Maybe you
Hmm.
might blink and miss it. It was during one of the Andrex adverts with the puppies. It ran along, dragging the toilet roll behind it. As it ran through the
Yeah,
garden, you saw the truck drive past. That was weird. It was strange to me. The Cadbury's Flake woman in the bath. You could just dimly see through the window as she was
yes.
luxuriating the famous lights
Hmm.
reflecting in the window.
I remember that very distinctly.
Well, you definitely replayed that video many times. That advert, obviously.
It was worthy of a great deal of investigation once again because of its sheer reach.
I did notice you definitely reached a lot during the advert.
Mm. Yeah, it was one of those things where you had to sort of lean forward and make sure you caught every detail because you never know what you might miss if you don't carefully review it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you certainly took in every detail you could. Um, I had, I had you, I had you made use of Andrex as well, so it worked well the two together.
As I said, there are no coincidences.
Exactly. Uh, so, how many how many different adverts in the end did you find out have had a sighting of the Coca-Cola truck in your research?
After adding up all of the ones I could find, I discovered a total of about 20,
Mm.
which is an alarmingly huge number for any single phenomenon. Um, Especially a phenomenon that most people, when confronted with the same thing over and over again in an advert, quickly become very, very annoyed with it. And in some cases, something that appears in an advert dozens of times, people are really irritated by even the very first time they see it. What is suspicious and particularly interesting about the Coca Cola truck is that people seem to actively look forward to it. They want to see it. And this led me down an interesting rabbit hole about the nature of addiction.
Mm.
Um, it turns out that not only, as is, I think, widely known, can sugar and things that one might find in a product like Coca Cola prove to be highly addictive substances. More intriguingly, the name, the branding, the something about it makes the appearance of simply the image of it actually addictive. People miss it when it's not around. They look forward to it when it comes. It is alarming, frankly. So
Well,
naturally, I wrote a pamphlet.
exactly, and because that was why I was worried that when you're watching the Flake advert so often that you had fallen foul of it, but you assured me that you had not, of course.
I obviously have the skill set necessary to avoid such traps.
Hmm. Those traps.
Those traps, yes.
Mm. Um, for me, I think that, as we all know, the Coca-Cola truck nowadays has reached quite a point of fame. Some would say infamy in advertising. It's wormed its way into everything about Christmas, even from Santa's suit to jingles to everything that people expect from Christmas. People,
Mm.
like you say, are looking forward to it. They want to see the Coca-Cola truck. Um, were there times in your research where people swore blind that it was there, but perhaps through seeing other videos and yearning for it, it wasn't actually there at all? In some of the things
Um,
they said.
uh, I think it is sometimes hard to distill the difference between that which people want desperately to see and that which they actually see. If you want something badly enough, you sort of start seeing it everywhere, like seeing shapes in clouds, if you know what I mean.
Mm. Numbers is a famous one, of course.
Of
Patterns.
course, we are pattern recognition animals and we see the patterns we're looking for everywhere. Um, what I found most compelling is the number of people who, for example, swear that when they were at school and they were being taught in their religious education classes about the original story of Christmas as laid out in the Bible,
Mm.
that the the Coca-Cola truck was prominently featured in those verses.
Mm.
Now, obviously, I immediately turned to the many different copies of many different Bibles that I have and scoured them carefully. And while the book is not always written in a strictly literal sense of language, there is some euphemism in there. I truthfully wasn't able to find anything I could conclusively point to as being a Coca-Cola truck in that book at all.
I remember someone swearing on their lives almost that um, upon looking at an old Bible that have been one of those that have been ornately painted by friars and monks from long ago, that the truck was there, but to my eyes, it was the three wise men. I don't know if the same was for you. I know you spent a long time flicking through every page looking for the Coca Cola truck.
I did, and I've seen references to it that people have come up with about um, Jesus returning to Jerusalem and Passover. In fact, riding on the top of a Coca Cola truck, and I'm unwilling to discount these ideas, but I feel there is an element in which you could say that some of it is perhaps leaning more towards wish fulfillment rather than actual reality.
Now, at the time, your pamphlet focused very much on the patterns of the Coca Cola truck appearing in these 20 adverts. It was what you focused on at the time, and I think you'd agree now that you jumped quite early on the pamphlet
Mm.
because the more you looked into it, was the realization that those that had seen the Coca Cola truck in adverts,
Mm.
um, almost to a man and a woman, had to undergo horrific root canal work within
Mm.
a month or two of 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 the sightings reaching, every advert having it. That must be interesting to find such a pattern.
It, it was. I'm always unconvinced by this is a personal position. I'm unconvinced by myths that involve dentists.
Good. Oh, yeah, you've often said that.
Mm.
That's a drinking conversation we have quite often.
Absolutely.
Mm.
I don't. I after very careful analysis of all available evidence, I have come to the conclusion that dentists simply do not exist. There is no such thing, and they are a fantasy concocted in mythology.
Mhm.
So whenever anyone talks about a dentist, it is clearly untrue. Um, However, there certainly is something something in this connection. I'm sorry, it's weird. I've got this strange taste of Coca-Cola in my throat. Um, but uh, while I was in the process of constructing my pamphlet, which is still available, I still have several thousand copies
Mhm.
if anyone is interested.
Mm.
Um, One of the very first people I sent it to was someone who'd been fascinated by my thesis and wanted to receive it. Um, Complimented me on the design of the cover.
Oh, it was a beautiful cover.
Well, you see,
Was
that's interesting to hear you say it because you're another one of those who received the pamphlet. The cover simply had text on it,
oh,
but I was told that on arrival it had an actual picture of the Coca Cola truck on it.
it it doesn't have the picture. Oh,
You see, this is the thing. It's as if you cannot get away from it.
hang on, let me. I keep it close to me at all times, of course, of course. Okay, okay. Hmm, it's no, it is okay. It is just text on the front. You're right. Interesting.
It is amazing.
Now
I'm
that I look at
genuinely
it.
confused by this. It's as if once you start thinking about the Coca Cola truck, you cannot get away from it. You see it everywhere. It is addictive advertising. And in my pamphlet, of course, I went into detail as to the individuals who were tasked with creating this advertising campaign originally.
Mm.
Um, and as I don't want to spoil the end of the pamphlet, but the central takeaway is that nobody who works now or has ever worked for the Coca Cola Corporation has any record of the adverts ever being commissioned, and they appear to have sprung into existence naturally.
Quite a sobering thought. I myself am quite surprised about that. Did you show
It
any of
is.
them footage of the other adverts with the trucks
I
in?
did. It turns out that many of the people who've worked for the corporation or for marketing firms that the corporation has employed have seen one or two of them, but were quite baffled as to how many there were and couldn't put their finger on which ones they'd had a hand in creating. It was very strange.
I know that you did some research into the adverts, and you'd take a room full of people. You'd take a room remotely, of course,
Mhm.
but you'd get a room full of people together. I'd often be tasked with bringing them into the room and pressing play on the VCR, as you like to use. I'm glad you've moved on from Betamax finally. It's, it was always flawed, I felt. But we can argue about that another time. That's another drinking conversation for us.
Hmm.
Um, I played the 20 adverts for them for you, and I took the information on whether they saw the Coca-Cola truck or not, and handed it blind to you. So it's very important that one does not interfere in another's research until they're ready to share it. Um, what was your research on in the same room watching the same advert? Did everyone see the truck?
The ones who were shown the advert with the truck in it saw the truck.
Mm-hmm.
And so did those who saw the other advert, which also had the truck in it. They all saw the truck.
So the truck is undoubtedly there
It's universally seen. Yes,
in at least 20 adverts that we know of, and perhaps more.
it's entirely possible that it appears in countless adverts that I simply did not locate. It's not an area that I'm particularly au fait with because relatively few of the ancient texts that I normally peruse actually have images of the Coca-Cola truck in them.
For me, the shocking thing was someone that sent footage of the Domino's Pizza app, where it shows
Mm.
you your pizza's being delivered, and instead of the little Domino's like moped sign, it was a Coca-Cola truck delivering your pizza.
You see, again, I, I, I don't generally order pizza
Oh, of course.
because food that is both round and flat I find uncomfortable. But um, the the compelling one for me was the inscriptions in the Temple of Karnak, which, to my mind, clearly show an image of the Coca-Cola truck.
I can. I'd like to see that image. Maybe we can uh, look at the old text and the images together. It's a wonderful way to spend an evening when I come to yours. I enjoy it immensely.
It is a pleasant experience, isn't it? Looking through a dusty tome, enjoying the Cadbury's Flake adverts.
Exactly. We seem to spend more time watching the advert than the tome.
Well, the advert grabs the attention more easily, but I think because it's a moving picture.
Oh yeah, I can see that, and it's very important to recognise the Coca-Cola truck in the background, of course, fleetingly.
That too.
So, with all your research, especially you are the specialist, and I bow to you from time to time when you are clearly the specialist in such a case. Um, the Coca-Cola truck, Rick Bishop. Would you say that you believe in something mystical and strange, uh, wheedling its way into the consciousness through other adverts and ancient writings? Or are you skeptical?
The simple truth is, in this case, it's one of those instances where everybody sees it everywhere,
Mm.
which would normally make me deeply suspicious.
Mm.
But here's the thing: almost everybody who sees it everywhere thinks of it as completely normal and natural, and it
Mm.
clearly is not. So, for that reason, I think it is an obscure enough mystery that I have to say, on this occasion, I believe.
I've, me and the other eight pamphlet owners are pleased to hear that. We feel like we've not paid £1.99 in vain. Um, I also believe you won me over. I think repeated viewings of the Flake advert, I think, really won me over more than anything else. And I was very much open to your teachings at that point. But when you start looking for it, and dear viewer, I recommend it, especially over these Christmas periods where the Coca-Cola truck's in everyone's collective uh, thought process. Look into adverts, see if you can find it there. And if you can, please send a message through fax or pigeon to Rick or myself, and we'll look into it more. Because advertising is indeed insidious, Rick, and there's something to it.
It is a dark, dark art, and we haven't got to the bottom of this one yet.
That's very exciting. I always love the fact there's more to learn. Speaking of more to learn, we have one more. I'm not keeping you up, Rick. I hope. I know.
No, I have hours more work after this. I'm translating the text of several flake adverts into Etruscan.
Uh, I hope. I assume that some viewing will be necessary for that.
Yes, yes, naturally.
You need to get it correct. Well, if I can tear you away from that for a while, there's one more thing I want us to look at, and it's a local tale, uh,
Excellent.
and we're back within Faversham itself. We always look locally in Kent, and we've been to Chatham, we've been to Faversham, we've been to Kent in general, and tonight we're very, very Faversham, for it is a tale that's gone on since the golden age of the bauble in the 70s onwards.
Mm.
It is and everyone's mum and aunt would know this tale. It is the tale of the borrowed bauble, Rick Bishop. passed on from generation to generation.
Mm.
What about this makes it particularly Faversham based? Many towns must have similar tales.
Well, you say that when when you approached me with covering this one for our festive edition, I did do a quick survey of the online databases that that people tend to record these elements into um, the most reliable wikis and areas of the dark web, and um, it's it's a strange thing. Um, I wasn't able to find a reference to this at all. It was something I naturally assumed was universal. So I popped up a little précis of the story on a few of the sites to see if anyone else had sort of said, "Oh yes, we know, we know what's what this is. We've seen it in our own community. We've seen it in our own environment." And it was deafening silence. It was apparently new to everyone. Um, and that's odd when it's something that's so familiar to you in the local community, isn't it?
I think so. Everyone's there's so many. When I don't like to give out my location, but I think I can keep this vague enough. When I was young, in this area of Kent, um, I went to a village primary school, as many people did, and at the time, everyone's mum um, looked the same: a nice jumper, a nice perm, um, and normally a Deirdre Barlow pair of glasses.
Hmm.
And they would pick you up from school. They would talk to the other permed, bespectacled mothers. And as Christmas approached, they would ask about plans and when the tree was going up and what you were doing for Christmas and Boxing Day and so on. And it became quite a thing within the Kentish lexicon, especially around Faversham. Um, the idea of lending other people a bauble. And it wasn't necessarily for kind reasons, but almost to remove it from your house, Rick.
That is the thing. So, as it happens, I have in the past heard tales from various family members that it is not uncommon to give the gift of a Christmas decoration, a bauble of some kind, at this time of year for people to put on their Christmas tree. And obviously, um, it's reasonable to assume that in the vast majority of cases, those gifts are meant with the warmest of intent. But from time to time, you do hear tale, and apparently, this story is unique to Faversham of a specific bauble which has been passed from friend to friend, family member to family member around the town year after year because people feel very uncomfortable around it and swear that it brings bad luck or unpleasant outcomes. Um, the first I heard of it, which this goes back to when I was a child. I mean, this is a long time ago.
Mm.
Um, Apparently, there was the bauble was lent to a friend to put on their Christmas tree and brighten up their life. And when Christmas Day came and the presents were opened, um, not a single item had batteries included, not even one. And that statistically is effectively impossible.
It's it's very reminiscent of the black spot in Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, I would say. Such a
It is.
curse. That a batteries not included curse is almost greater in a way. It is that whoever has the borrowed bauble on Christmas Day, if it's hanging from your tree, is um, is beset by huge misfortune, or small misfortune, but
Mm.
misfortune nonetheless. And yet, for a while, for a few years, it almost became a schoolyard dare that if you received this bauble, the dangerous bauble, um, you you proudly put it on your tree and put up with you prepared and put up with whatever it brought with it.
Over the years, I've heard tell of the bauble causing ruined gravy, causing acute angina in people in the house, causing headaches. Apparently, after a particularly heavy night of drinking in one family in the centre of Faversham, everybody awoke with piercing headaches and considerable discomfort in their intestines. And um, it is it is clearly a curse that travels from place to place. But the thing that I find, I suppose, most interesting is that when the story was first recounted to me, it was always the borrowed bauble. That's it's always
Hmm.
implied that it's borrowed for a Christmas tree. But when you look into it, in every case, it was presented as a gift. It was as if someone was desperate to get it out of their house and chose to do so by passing the curse on to somebody else. Which makes me wonder why borrowed. And I think that's down to the fact that there is, by all accounts, no family that's ever kept it for 2 years. It's not that you borrow it from your neighbor or your friend, you borrow it for a year from the universe or something.
It's it is a incredibly good point to make. The last 9 or 10 years, those that have had the borrowed bauble, there's Reddit threads and all sorts now dedicated to it. The Faversham um, Facebook group, there's always talk every year about who has it, and they'll talk about the misfortune. And it seems that mostly now, for the last 10 years, most of the misfortune has been there's been nothing. They found nothing good to watch on TV on Christmas Day,
That
um,
does seem to be a common thread.
which surprises me with so many channels to have nothing good on Christmas Day is shocking to me. And those that have passed it on, that have lent it to borrow it from the universe, they passed it on, who have often, because of the upset last year, haven't put the TV on, have without the bauble, have found a much better Christmas.
Yes, I think that's certainly true. Um, I mean, it was oddly one of those sort of conflations of circumstance. When we were chatting about this, I recalled that it came up during my conversations about the Coca Cola truck, because people said that there was one year where every channel they turned to suddenly had the advert on rather than any actual programming, which was obviously a consequence of this curse.
I do hear that one year the bauble, and you never told me, so I had to research into it, Rick Bishop, and I'm upset about it. One year, the bauble briefly passed before your eyes. You were not the receiver of it, but you were in the presence of the borrowing.
I saw it unwrapped as a present at a dinner party where just before Christmas, where presents were being handed around, and it was one of those ones where people wouldn't see each other again, at Christmas itself. So everyone opened their presents at the table,
Hmm.
and yes, I witnessed it, um, and I will confess that on seeing it, my level of dread was acute. Um, I I immediately decided to take a quick step outside to comfort myself with some carefully filtered air, and and avoid any sight of it until it was tucked away in someone's bag. It was an alarming and macabre sensation.
Did you ever find out what befell the receiver of the borrowed bauble that year?
I did indeed, yes. Um, it was sadly a dire outcome for them, though, as you rightly say, on the large scheme of things, not necessarily the very worst thing that could happen. Um, Apparently, when they cooked their turkey for Christmas lunch, um, tragically they left a bag full of its innards inside the bird
It
in the
never
oven.
it never happens, Rick. It's the power of the bauble.
It is that's that's not something that could ever actually happen in reality. It would be laughable. It's a sitcom joke rather than a real world happening. No, but it turns out in the presence of the bauble, these monstrous things can happen.
Is the I lost track. I was tracking the bauble. Um, as I say on the local posts, it was being tracked quite well. The last 2 years, we've heard nothing of it. What do you feel may have happened? Has the line been broken? Has Are people too afraid to talk of it now?
I always find when that kind of thing happens, when the trail goes cold, it's it could in theory be down to one of three things. Obviously, it could be that in fact the trail's still there, but it hasn't for whatever reason been reported or heard about. You know, it's off our radar for some reason. That could be the case. Um, it could be the case that the curse itself has come to an end and the matter is resolved. Um, but I think in every instance where we investigate any of these kinds of things, we've always come to the conclusion that the far more likely reason is that for the last few years there have been no survivors.
Hmm. The curse has ramped up somewhat.
Potentially, yes. And it may go back to messing with food and spoiling gravy in the future. But for now at least, it appears to be an absolutely lethal curse.
Perhaps the viewers have those that have had it have just been stuck watching Mrs. Brown's Boys, a fate
Well,
worse than death.
yes, exactly. I mean, there are some potential ends that are too hideous to even contemplate.
Rick, if someone approached you next December, not that you've been to a dinner party for a while now, but
Hmm.
if you opened your mail and the borrowed bauble, as it's pictured there, of course, it's a beautiful
Mm-hmm.
bauble from the 70s. Um, if the bauble made your presence, would you hang it bravely from that small foil tree that you keep in the corner of your room?
I have for a long time insisted on only attending Christmas events between Christmas and New Year, so as to avoid this being a thing.
Mm.
Um, I have known great tragedy in my life. I recall one flight to the United States when the in flight movie starred Adam Sandler, for example. And I don't need any more of it. I fear what the bauble would do. And I know enough of the mysteries of demons and devils and ancient gods to know that you don't mess with their items and their trinkets.
Is there as a man of the dusty tomes and the flake adverts, but the flake adverts don't hold so much for this one. Is there historical relevance to such a trinket being passed around?
Yes, there are countless stories of cursed objects. Um, they are recounted extensively in the ancient myths and legends, especially in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and many are also faithfully recorded in more modern editions, such as the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Hmm.
Um, but the the simple truth is, these objects, I think, often bring their power through the way the mind expects to perceive them. Um, I find it more likely that someone is so afraid of something that it changes the way they act than that it is actually the literal power of a god or a demon coming down upon them. Because, I've gone looking for such things and they are quite hard to find. Actual relics and artifacts of real gods and demons are not that commonly put on eBay.
Not so much these days. Not since eBay's become more of a shop-led organisation.
Yes, I think that's certainly changed the reality of it. And obviously, we spend a lot of time on the dark web, looking for um, well, many things. It's not important, but some of the things that we do keep an eye out for are actual divine and unholy objects. Um, and for the most part, when I've placed orders for them, I've been disappointed with what arrived.
People often are when they order off the internet, Rick. Unfortunately.
Yes, yes, and not merely because of the shipping charges.
Oh, which are ferocious, especially from
Mm,
abroad these days.
absolutely.
Um, so, Rick, it's been an interesting tale of the borrowed bauble, one that I hope, part of me hopes continues, as terrifying as the outcomes can be, whether lumpy gravy or bad television over Christmas. The curse of the borrowed bauble, because it's so local, also feels to me quite warming and comforting that there's someone out there in the town that has this cursed globe hanging upon their tree. And it's more warming that it's not me.
I think that is a joy in life, particularly at this time of year, to know that when you are having an argument with your family and getting disappointed with the presents you got, and the weather's miserable and nobody wants to go outside, so they're all stuck staring at the same four walls, screaming at each other, and you turn on the television and it's Adam Sandler. At that moment, there is somebody who's actually having a worse Christmas than you.
So with that warming festive thought in your mind, and I haven't played any good music for a little while. A nice build. Let's get one out there before we ask you. Rick Bishop, in the case of the borrowed bauble, do you believe or do you remain skeptical?
Dickie, I believe in the myth, but not in the bauble. I remain skeptical, I'm afraid. I think this is mass hysteria.
Mm, a very good point, and I'm glad that we agree in the bauble. I think that for me, the thing that wins me over to be, and I've gone full belief tonight, which is very rare for me. You know me, I'm open to such things. I'm perhaps more open than you. Maybe my spiritual third eye is a weak point for me, and that perhaps it's too open sometimes. But there's just too many cases of reports of bad Christmas television, of
Mm.
badly dry, overcooked turkey, giblet bags, Mrs. Brown's boys, arguments, uh, horrible headaches the day after Christmas. That for me, in regards to the borrowed bauble, I believe fully that the person that carries it will be cursed somewhat over Christmas with one of those things.
Okay.
I know
Then I
I'm
suppose
easily
I,
swayed.
though I suppose I do have to ask the question then.
Mm.
I'm hoping you don't currently have it on your tree.
Um, Fortunately, I do not. Which which statistically takes the likelihood down by one. And I
It's
hope,
true.
Rick, that you also do not this year.
I do not this year.
So it is out there somewhere, and in the 20,000 or however many people are local these days, for the one that has it out there, Godspeed. We hope that it's Christmas Eve now, so we hope that tomorrow it does not bring you horrific misfortune, more a small misfortune. Maybe that you, when you pull the cracker, you receive the smaller half,
Yes,
or that
or the little explosive strip doesn't go bang.
exactly,
Something like that.
yeah, or you get the golf tee instead of the far superior fortune telling fish.
Exactly. Yes. Though, I mean, don't get me started on those fortune telling fish because, I mean,
Well, I have the,
that's a whole other
I
story.
have your pamphlet on that as well. A very
Yes.
well written piece, which I recommend to anyone. Um, well, Rick, Merry Christmas to you. I know you don't celebrate in a certain way, but you do celebrate in a way written in a 4,000-year-old document from an unknown civilization.
Um, yes, I have my own forms of celebration, and while they may not be everybody's, they are important to me. Thank you, and I wish you a very Merry Christmas. And uh, thank you once again for joining me, Dickie, on this exploration of the ragged edge of reality.
As always, it's a pleasure. I think it's nice to bring a certain light-hearted approach to our fellow snufflers at Christmas. Um, it's important that searching and snuffling for those truth truffles is a 365 day, or some would say 372 day a year activity. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean.
We should discuss that on a future podcast, actually.
I think we should, and it's nice that we can look into certain things at Christmas that we might look at uh, other days of the year for seeing it as frippery and too much cheeriness.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yes. So to all of our listeners, hope you have a fantastic Christmas. And just be glad when you look at your Christmas tree that you're not the one with the borrowed bauble.
oh, a blessing indeed. Merry Christmas, Rick. Merry Christmas, everyone else. And may all your Christmases be snuffly.
Good night.